we began what we call social therapeutics now, which is this approach to collective creativity, collective creating environments for growth in all different environments, places, populations. It began as a therapy, as a so-called radical therapy in the early 1970s, where the idea was we have to create a new kind of emotional support that's based on the activity of speaking to each other and how therapeutic that is. Doesn't matter what you talk about. Doesn't matter. What matters is the how.
Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Lois Holzman as we take a communication perspective on social therapeutics and performance activism. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Lois Holzman. Lois is the director of the Eastside Institute, a research and education center for both social therapeutics and performance activism, which we're going to talk about today. Lois has done so much wonderful work in the world, including being the author of a recent book, which we are also going to talk about, that invites all of us to consider ourselves as developmentalists. There's so much great, juicy stuff in this conversation with Lois today. And just to give you some context, this is kind of a follow-up to a conversation that was had on a different podcast between myself, Don Weissenen, and Des, the host of All Power to the Developing, the podcast for the Eastside Institute. I think there's a lot of overlap and a lot to be learned when you combine my work and the work of the CMM Institute around a communication perspective with the work of the Eastside Institute around performance. Again, this is a really great, juicy episode, so let's dive right in and begin the conversation with Lois. Hello, Lois. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. I've really been looking forward to speaking with you.
Thank you, Abbie. And I likewise have been looking forward to speaking with you. Our past brief conversations have been catalyzing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. There's definitely some good context for this conversation that I want to mention. And as my listeners will know at this point, I like to start with the question of how are we arriving? I'll give you one more second to think about your answer and go ahead and share for me that, again, some important context for this conversation is that myself, along with Don Weissenen, were just able to be on the Eastside Institute's podcast, All Power to the Developing with Des. And that was the beginning of this conversation that we're having, combining your world of things with my world of things. And I think that was a great place to start. And I'm excited for this conversation as a next turn to that. I will have you kind of introduce the work that you do, the work of the Eastside Institute in a moment, but something that I'll kind of pull out of that immediately and share as far as what's been sticking with me is this language of performance is very important in the work that you do, I know. And something I'll want you to get in later is this idea of performing beyond yourself. And ever since I first heard that language, that has really stuck with me and been a really important lens. And so I'm excited to dive deeper into that today with you a little, and hopefully offer that to other people as well as something that might resonate with them. So all of that context is what I'm bringing with me today. Just a lot of excitement and energy to hopefully learn from each other. So Lois, how are you arriving?
I am arriving anticipatory. I've been thinking lately, for a long time, but intensely lately, about structure and systems and the unsystematic nature of, I think, what the world needs now and what I see growing in many, many places. And I call that rhizomic, like a rhizome, like mushrooms, like asparagus, like ginger, where it's not a hierarchy. It's not a tree that grows taller and taller, but it's more underground, and it's more anything, any sprout can sprout somewhere, and then it's part of the unsystematic system. And you don't know what will happen when it grows and what it will grow. And so that's what creates hope for me, seeing that all over the world.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. And I'll be excited to hear more about what you mean by that later. To start us off, though, Lois, could you please introduce yourself to us? Keeping in mind, what are the stories you want to share? Having a, kind of vague idea of what we're going to talk about today. What would you like us to know about you going into this conversation?
I don't like labels, hate them. And I have a lot to say about identity and how it is stifling. And in lieu of a label, I think of myself as an activity.
I love that.
And the activity could fall under many titles, but one of them is organizer of environments for ongoing creativity and becoming. And as what people are not only capable of, but do at a certain point in their lives when they're very, very young, and then all the institutions, including the Institution of Language and Psychology, etc., keep us from doing that, and we do something else instead, which isn't very productive. So, an organizer of environments.
Lois, immediately, I know that you have a background in sociolinguistics, and I can see that already coming out in the language and you being very picky about that, which I love and appreciate, because coming from a communication perspective, I also love the language of things and have come to really appreciate the kind of dual facets of language as a way to name, but also as a way to shape. And so that's why I do try to be intentional about the beginnings of each of these conversations and how I ask people to introduce themselves, because I usually ask for a bio and I'll put it in the notes, and then people can find links to the different things that you do, because I want them to be able to be connected to your work. But also, I do want to open more avenues for how we talk about ourselves and use this language of stories. What's a story you're telling about yourself, and how do you want to feel known, and what do you want other people to know about you, rather than prompting, tell us what you do or what your job is. But who are you? And I appreciate your answer for, really getting at the core of, it sounds like, what's important to you about what the work that you do and the way that you are in the world.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, every time I'm asked this question, I answer in a different way, of course, because it's all relational.
Yeah.
And where you are and what you are. And so many people forget that.
Yeah.
They forget that they're actually speaking with someone, and they're just saying what's on their mind.
Yeah, yeah. And importantly, I think you're bringing with you all the stories of what's come before. And that's why I like the how are we arriving question, to acknowledge, in the language of the CMM theory, this podcast conversation is one episode out of many. And it's, we've named a start and an end when I hit record, and then when I hit, end of the recording. That's how I've defined this episode. But really, it's so much more expansive, and we're bringing other things into this conversation. So I love that. And kind of following that train of thought, I wonder if there's any other stories you'd be willing to share about life experiences you have had that led you to be who you are now, do the work that you do now, and think in the way that you do now.
Well, there are probably many, and another thing I try to avoid is any hint at causality. So even the language of led me to, I have no idea. I don't know if anything led me. I could say what influences my particular story right now would point to, and they might 10 years ago have been very different. And they're a story. They're kind of a rationale after the fact, as opposed to, I don't know what the opposed to is. I just, so I can point to having a skepticism toward things that I hardly knew about, but like therapy, because I didn't understand the rationale for it, or I didn't believe the rationale for it, i.e., if you find out a cause, what it was like, what led you there, then you'll be able to change it. Didn't fly with me, even though I had never studied psychology at all. What led me was an abhorrence of inequality and racism in particular. And what led me was, in the way that most young people, teenagers are, is not wanting to be like their parents. And only later finding out, not only are you, but they did so many wonderful things. And I try to talk to people about that now. It's like, well, they couldn't have been all bad because you're here and you think X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
But anyway, if you're asking me honestly, I'm saying that. Having a brother and a sister, both of whom rebelled before I did, as I was the youngest, and seeing that you could do something completely different. Meeting Fred Newman, philosopher and community organizer, who mixed this revolutionary politics with incredible intelligence, Western and Eastern, and asked me to join with him in creating new things like the Institute. Prior to that, having worked with two mentors, one at Columbia University, one at Rockefeller University, in my quest to understand language and how we learn it and what it has to do with our thinking and our feeling, in some high-level prestigious research projects. And they are having progressive politics as well. And so seeing that that psychology and social sciences have a politic, and that I didn't like it, and it was detrimental to people. It preserved the status quo and individualism and alienation, et cetera, and we could transform it and create a new one. Reading Lev Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist from the 1920s and 30s, and being inspired and influenced and catalyzed by his work and all of my work. Those are some.
Yeah, that's really wonderful and already gives me a hint into, I think, maybe why the work that you do resonates with the work that I do, is that similarly, and using the language of communication and CMM, what was so revolutionary to me when I first learned about CMM as a social constructionist perspective was the idea that meaning is socially constructed, which made me feel empowered to be curious about how I'm making meaning and how we're making meaning and what meaning we're making, what choices we're making around that. Because I felt that I came from a world that was not so curious about that. There wasn't conversation going on. I had never heard the word social construction before. And so it's such a lens for me that I carry into every area of my life. And it's something I hope I want to share with other people as well, because it is empowering. That's just the best word I think that comes to mind for me, is to give people tools to make choices in their own life. And for whatever reason, I feel very predisposed towards wanting to grow and develop and be curious about the stories I have about myself, and telling stories that are helpful for me to be able to continue to be in the world in a way that is compassionate and loving and curious. And so this all, brings me back to say it makes sense that, there's some overlap in our work. And I'm curious, now that you've, begun to introduce yourself, would you introduce to us the Eastside Institute and the ideas that was founded upon?
Absolutely. So what the Institute is today is a international center for what are called social therapeutics and performance activism. And I can get into the history of those, what they mean, what they are as activities, if we wish to. But basically, we're a place to support people, to support each other, to create communities that create community in an ongoing way, like the rhizome I talked about.
Yes.
To bring to people the simple hidden fact that human beings are choice makers, are tool makers. We don't just use the tools that are available, but we make new ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Collective creators of everything there is. That's the social constructionism at the heart of our work. And social, not just in our origins, but social in our every fiber. I think the word interconnected is not strong enough for what we are.
Yeah.
I think we are a unity with every other person and plant and animal. And to create the Institute, create activities and support people to create new activities that in their practice create something new, and in the creating of the new expose how narrow and stifled our everyday thinking and everyday feeling and everyday relatedness is through the various institutions that shape us. Language being one of the major ones. The idea, and this is again where we overlap in our philosophies, I think, Abbie, and don't overlap in our language. So
Yeah.
I love that difference. So to go back to something you said earlier, it's remarkable how few people get asked or invited to give their understanding of what language is. And so, and I used to do a lot of like, what is language and why does it matter? And we tend to think of it as something that has to do with the dictionary.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And as you said earlier, something that defines, something that describes. We don't think of it, as Wittgenstein did, as a form of life and activity. We don't think of it, as Vygotsky said, as a social created historical activity of making meaning. And so it's so important for people to kind of have an experience in doing this, maybe with the Institute in some form of a workshop or class or whatever, and then take that experience and use their imagination to create their own activities for their own communities and their own cultures, so that people recognize, like I did this workshop a few times in May, international, that talks through my new book, Developmentalist Guide to a Better Mental Health, Navigating Everyday Life Dilemmas. And I asked people to just spoke about binaries and either or and good and evil. I didn't speak about it, I just said, write in the chat every either or that you find in your life. And within 2 minutes, people generated like 75 things.
Yeah.
And that activity itself was eye-opening, like, oh my goodness. Because I was saying we're polarized, but we're also bipolarized. Like we are shaped to see polarities
Yeah.
in everything. And what would it be like? Can we play with those and engage in the activity of meaning making that not only exposes that, which we just did, but let's take a deep dive into what it looks like in your life and how you see, for example, dilemmas. Bad, you have to make a choice between two things, neither of which is great. Well, what if we could get rid of the polarity there and open up into brand new possibilities for this situation of, should my kid go away to college or stay home? Should we get divorced or stay together? And all kinds of things that people put as either or. I forgot what I was responding to, but there we go.
No, that's great. I was just generally asking about the Eastside Institute and the work that you do there. So you've, given us a great place to start with that.
Right. And we do, very concrete workshops, creating our mental health, where we use poetry and go into food shelters and food banks and homeless shelters and create with people there. Never mention the word therapy or mental health, but people find it extremely therapeutic to work together. We have an annual gathering of performance activists, people who use play or performance to transform the world in their communities and bigger than that. And that's called Performing the World, coming up in November. And dozens and dozens of workshops, the how of performance activism. We have about 200 associates around the world who have graduated from our programs, our signature program, the international class, where they work together in a cohort with people around the world. And it's all post-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, whatever. It has no discipline. It's like whoever wants to get some support to build a project and change the world. And so this engaging in what I rather call languaging is extremely important.
The language that I would love to go back to is this performance activism. And I'd love to hear how you understand that and kind of what it looks like to live into that. And I'll just briefly share that was part of that first kind of connection for me between my work and this work is that I've already mentioned Don Weissman, who's been on this podcast, and you can hear me with him on the All Power to the Developing podcast. Like I said, his lens is so shaped by improv, and that is feels like such a gift that he's given me through conversations I've been in with him, that language has come to be really important to me in my understanding of what communicating and relating can look like, and what, in my opinion, are some of the more beautiful and exciting aspects of communicating are based in improvisation, which feels, a link to performance, and this other word that you've just used of playing. And I think I imagine you'd agree, but don't let me put words in your mouth. I'd love to know how you think about this. There's so many heavy, horrible, hard things going on in the world that we need to face and we need to pay attention to, and we need to be having conversations around and taking action about. And I think play and performance are really important for that, even though it sounds kind of counterintuitive. I think that's important now more than ever. So tell us about performance activism and the role you see it having for us.
Well, I couldn't agree with you any more than I do, Abbie, because it's precisely at these horrible times that play is needed more than ever. See, if we don't, and I can, by play, I really fundamentally follow Vygotsky on this, which is that in play, children perform a head taller. That
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Yes, that a baby, toddler, playing a superhero is both the baby and the superhero. The superhero being who he's not, the baby being who he is. Simultaneously, just like actors on the stage are simultaneously their character and themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the growth through that experience that occurs is like no other growth.
Mm.
The growth of performing as other. And so what Vygotsky means is that in play, playing the superhero, playing mommy, playing doctor, the baby, the toddler does things that he is not capable of doing without play.
Mm.
Can't do it. And the wonderful thing about the babies and the toddlers is even in terrible circumstances, there is the element that what you're doing all day, if you're a year old, is playing. Your whole life is playing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know the distinction between work and play that is imposed on us.
Yeah.
You don't know the distinction between learning and playing that is imposed on us. And one of the things about this play and living your life as play is that the relationship between your experience, a new one, let's say you go to the zoo, come back, and your imagination
Mm-hmm.
is incredibly rich.
Mm-hmm.
Kids come back from the zoo and they line up their teddy bears or their racing cars who become zebras and giraffes and lions. So when we are very young, we put our imagination to use immediately and we create new experiences, which then generate new imaginings, etc., etc., etc. We lose that capacity, we lose that support as we get older and we have a new experience and we, go to Italy and we take pictures and we send postcards home and we look in our album and it's not like we really put it immediately to use by our imagination. It becomes a memory. And that is not just very sad, but not developmental, not growthful. You can't create new meanings unless you let your new experiences enrich your imagination and create new possibilities. So performance activism is a term that we used, we made it up, and it turns out there are other people who use it for a very other reason. As well, we think performing is how people grow, and we think performing is a social activity that can be world transforming. Because we have to create new performances of ourselves other than polarity, hatred, violence, war, etc. And so it turned out we kept meeting people around the world who believed the same thing in some form and were using play or performance for educational purposes, for both in schools, out of schools, for helping people avoid landmines, for safe sex in different countries, for all kinds of things from the poorest, most devastated place in the world to the richest. And so we gathered together in 2001, made a call for Performing the World Conference. We have to re-perform the world because this one stinks, as Fred Newman said. And we've been doing that conference just about every year. since then. As I said, the next one is in November. And anyone who is the performance or play advocate or activist or artivist, or someone who's interested in it is welcome to come. And last year we had like 700 people, which was by far the largest online one we've ever had. And also people had watch parties around the
Cool.
world. Got people together to watch one Zoom session or 5. And so performance activism is a new kind of non-negative revolutionary world transformation movement.
Yeah. I love what this language does in terms of expanding people's understanding of performance. Because one thing I do want to pick up on that you've said is like similar but very different language that I've heard people use is talk about performative activism as something that is shallow, inauthentic, and not at all what you're talking about, performance activism. And so I feel like this language and this way that you're talking about performing, and especially using an example of children, is so beautiful because it reminds us we've always been performing.
Exactly.
And performing, whether it is a true, that the sense of the word that maybe a lot of people think of an actor on a stage performing, it doesn't have to be inauthentic or disingenuous. Performing in your own day-to-day life and in all of the spaces of our world can be about the growth, the development of being better and practicing that and playing at that before maybe we have fully kind of embodied that, if you will. I think an experience that makes me think of for me is, and I know you're saying a lot of what you talk about is kind of, opposed to, you said earlier, or as a attempt to kind of differentiate from therapy. But in my own experience of therapy, I have done the talking through, the naming things, the language is so important to me. And I love that. And also where I've seen change in my life is when I'm able to say, what if I just acted like I thought this thing was true? And I practice that enough times until finally, I think it's true examples of that being that I have a lot of things in my life. I think I feel kind of very like finger on the trigger of like my stress response. A lot of things can stress me out. And having the language of social construction and meaning making is important too. And has helped me to begin to practice of moments that started to bring about stress for me. I had a way to pause and kind of examine that story and say, why do I feel like I have to be stressed right now? Why do I feel like I have to try to control this thing? What if I practice something different that was about peace and calm and letting go of control and trusting the emergence and the mystery of the situation? That's really hard for me, but what if I just act like it's true? So that's my version of like the performing beyond yourself and why it resonates with me so much, because I have my own experience in life to say, oh, I can look back and say I have changed because I have performed to a point where it's not performing anymore, but it is performing still in the way, you're talking about it. But I just think that language is really, really beautiful that you've offered.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, your example's wonderful and description, and it fits so much the thing you hear a lot, like just in regular talk among people, fake it till you make it.
Yeah, right.
And the thing is, when people, I mean, depends on where I am, but with you, I could get in this conversation. The whole idea of performing being inauthentic is misguided, because inauthentic is not performing. If you really, how did you get to be the way you are? Well, it turns out, my view and many others, and Vygotsky's view, if you believe that human beings are socially constructed with their uniqueness genetically and everything else, and their histories and the environment in which they're in, then everything you did as a baby was a performance. And many of them became solidified into behavior, what we call behavior. But how it began was through the revolutionary act, I think, of being supported to play.
Mm-hmm.
You could play at being a dancer like Beyonce, and your parents didn't say you don't know how to dance.
Right, right.
They said, "That's great, that's beautiful." And they never called it a performance,
Mm-hmm.
but it was you being other than you
Yeah, yes.
and growing until the time you could actually dance like Beyonce. So yeah, as a grown-up, as an adult, what I call the ability to perform other than how you're feeling is so important, just as your wonderful example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's really meaningful language for me, as I've said. And I am interested in, again, the other language you mentioned was social therapeutics, and your book that's just come out about the language you use being a developmentalist, as kind of like, I know you say you don't like titles or labels, but that feels like, something that one might be able to call themselves. I identify as a developmentalist, to be able to
Yeah.
kind of accept that story for themselves. So I'm curious about what that means to you and what it speaks to about a kind of larger framework that someone might have in their life about, if you were to call yourself a developmentalist,
Yeah.
what might that mean or look like?
Great question. I have been bringing it to many different kinds of groups of people,
Mm-hmm.
and it turns out so many of them are
Mm-hmm.
developmentalists. They just didn't know it. So
Yeah.
I do, since I was trained as a developmental psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a developmentalist is someone who supports people to continuously develop their
Mm-hmm.
lives, their communities, their world, their emotions, their relationship, da da da. And the best way I can describe it without being seen by our listeners
Mm-hmm.
is to visualize a ladder. That is one way, the common way of understanding development, known as stage theories. Okay. Human beings love to put things in stages.
Mm-hmm.
There's the stages of grief.
Yeah,
There's
right.
right?
Yeah.
And then if you don't pass through them fast enough, you get a diagnosis.
Mm.
There's stages of growth and development, Piagetian stages, Freudian stages, Ericksonian stages, Kohlberg stages of moral development, on and on. Hierarchy. I contrast that with what I see as the picture of development, which is a theatrical stage.
Mm.
So they're not stages of development,
Mm.
they're stages of and for development.
Yeah.
So we create constantly, we're human beings, create stages for our growth. And we began what we call social therapeutics now, which is this approach to collective creativity, collective creating environments for growth in all different environments, places, populations. It began as a therapy, as a
Mm-hmm.
so-called radical therapy in the early 1970s, where the idea was we have to create a new kind of emotional support that's based on the activity of speaking to each other and how therapeutic that is.
Mm.
Doesn't matter what you talk about. Doesn't matter. What matters is the how.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, resonates with CMM a lot. It's the how. How are we doing this? How are we? So when people, the mantra, the lament around the world is that people are not connected.
Yeah.
Well, I disagree.
Yeah.
I disagree strongly. I think we're connected in horrible ways.
Mm-hmm.
How can you hate if you're not connected? How can you kill if you're not
Mm.
connected?
Mm.
How can you be mean if you're not connected? It's how we're connected. And so how do we transform that way of connecting into the words you used before about care and compassion, being decent. So in a way, that's what social therapy is. Social therapeutics is all kinds of ways to collectively create environments that support people to see differently, relate differently, feel differently, and speak differently. And improv is, it's all improv. It's all improv, to go back to your excitement about discovering improv.
And this is taking me back to something that you and I've discussed in a previous conversation that I do want to get into today. And that's the kind of paradox of process and focusing on the how, and my real belief and your real belief, and what I would say is evident in the practices that our communities do, is that when you focus on the how, when you don't stress too much up front about what's the outcome going to be, what do we want the outcome to be, if you focus on the quality of the communicating, the quality of the playing, the quality of the performing, any, fill in the blank of whatever word you want to use that we've talked about today, the quality of the being together, you're going to create those beautiful outcomes. So again, that's one of those like things that sounds counterintuitive. Oh, forget about the outcome and you'll get the outcome. But I think that I found so much truth in the idea that it is about the quality of the being together. And again, we have choices in how we create spaces together, whether it's physically in communities that are location based, that are where you live, or virtually. It is a great tool, and you and I are online right now together, and this is a space that we create based on how we listen to each other and the kinds of questions we ask. And so that I just am such a big proponent of wanting people to understand that, again, part of communication is beyond the words, and it is the space that you create together. And yeah, I'm kind of losing my train of thought there, but I just love that idea so much about it's the quality of how we are together that matters so much.
I mean, the seeming paradox is kind of this key to, it's the key to whether or not we're going to survive. That's how profound what you said is.
Yeah. I don't think that's an overstatement. I agree.
No. And I don't think people have been shaped enough to appreciate paradox. And so I think that's part of our job as well. Like, there are a lot of paradoxes of being a human being. And people embraced that we are paradoxical, that the seemingly right direction is not. So one of the things, in addition to the one you just mentioned, it is believed that the more you know, the better you can be. Well, the paradox is, the more you know, the more trouble you get into. And so, how do you embrace the unknowability of being alive? And people say, I can't do that. That's too scary. I don't want to be scared. Well, I think if you embrace it, then you're more prepared for the next unbelievable thing that happens. if you embrace that you cannot know, we cannot know
Yeah.
what Israel is going to do next, what Iran's going to do next, what Trump is going to do next, what things we seemingly have no control over will happen, what the police will do next, what the car that is coming your way will do next, on and on and on. And so the more embracing you are of that, and that the more you're prepared, I think.
Yeah, this has actually been a distinction that's come up in a couple of my recent episodes as well, because again, in my attempt to embody more this valuing of process, I won't say over or instead of, but before outcome at least, I've really changed the way I approach my podcasts in terms of the number of questions that I send you ahead of time or the amount of research I do ahead of time. And I have felt a kind of dissonance within myself of having this story around doing less ahead of time, meaning that I'm not prepared. But I've been able to kind of tell a new story for myself that is redefining what preparation looks like, because I am so prepared. I don't plan as much as I used to, but I am so prepared now for the kind of conversation I want to have, because by letting go of trying to control every second of this hour-long conversation, by knowing exactly what questions I was going to ask or exactly what things I wanted to say, then I've created the space, like I was talking about a moment ago, for the kind of emergent conversation that I want to have. And like you said, things like that where you are letting go of control, that can be a very scary feeling. And I think that the response that I think is important to me is that so many people have kind of built up, okay, something is scary, I back off from it. That's a sign to turn around and walk away, rather than something might feel a little scary or uncomfortable. How might we lean into this? And so for me, the leaning into the slight discomfort of, I don't know what conversation we're about to have, and I hope it's really good. You know, I've walked away from podcasts with people who maybe don't have some of the same language that you and I share, and I can kind of feel their discomfort of, oh, I hope that conversation was what you wanted it to be, or, oh, I feel like we really meandered. And I kind of have to reassure them and myself to say, that's the point. The point is that we just had this like beautiful exploratory conversation that is a metaphor someone offered me recently, is like, it's a sandbox more than it's a roadmap, that we're just playing together. And the creating and the talking and the being together, that is the value.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, maybe that distinction is worth exploring between being prepared and planning.
Yes.
You know, I mean, my partner always says to me, if I say, I don't have a word written down, I'm just gonna, he said, your whole life is your preparation.
Yes. Yes.
And so you're kind of realizing that, Abbie, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
That you are prepared. Best thing about plans is that you can rip them up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so embracing the process is a really important thing. It doesn't mean not caring at all about the product. It will most likely get you a better product.
Right.
And that's a hard one for people, very hard.
Yeah. And as we think about how hard it really can be and how overwhelming or uncomfortable are other words I would use too, I come back to stories every time. I think when I've been able to hear stories of how other people have experienced a change in their life or felt like they've grown or performed something new, that is so empowering to me. And it's so exciting for me to hear those stories. So I wonder if you have any stories that you would share with me and people listening about really any of what we've talked about today, you know, the way you've seen performance activism or social therapeutics at work in the world, in your life or work, or any stories coming to mind. We'd love to hear.
Mm-hmm. Well, this woman, a young woman from Nigeria who leads a part of an organization called Street Project Foundation that's for art advocacy, which is a hard word for me to say. She's a poet and teaches poetry and other creative arts to young people in Nigeria. And she was a member of the 5-week class or seminar or conversation series that two of our staff, Melissa Meyer and Carrie Luman, do. And in their conversation, she wrote this poem, which just absolutely blew my mind. The first, it was like week 3 of the 4 weeks. She had not been in touch with our work or anything like that before. And I don't know, could I read it?
Oh, please. Yes, please.
Okay. I just have to find it on my screen.
Sure.
Oh, I know where it is. I know exactly where it is. Okay. A gift. Here we go. 1 second. So I think I'll share my screen. Can I do that?
Yeah, let me make that sure that I've.
And then we could read it together. Like you could read it I'll read a stanza, you read a stanza.
That sounds great.
I just realized that the audience can't see it, but that's okay. Okay, share. You see it?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So her name is Gift Chikari, and she calls herself the Gift. And she called it My Poetic Take on Development. And remember, this is like the 3rd week she's been in a conversation on development. What is development, if not the slow stretch of self, the honest work of unbecoming and then becoming again?
If not the trembling moments when a girl with questions grows into a woman with a voice, one that no longer asks for permission to be loud, to be art, to be here?
I've lived it in the stillness of grief, in the breaking open of silence, in the way my people shape possibility out of dust and dare to call it home.
Lois says it's not just progress, it's performance. Not a finish line, but a dance, a dialogue, a doing. That sits with me, like a rhythm I've always known, but didn't have the language for.
Because I've seen healing walk into a room wearing community. I've watched boys with broken fathers find their future in the line of a poem.
I've seen my own growth, not in titles, but in tears, not in applause, but in the quiet knowing that something shifted because I showed up whole.
So yes, development is who we are and who we're daring to become. It is every time I pick up a mic, a pen, not to impress, but to ignite.
Every time I sit in a circle and let my story breathe next to another's.
Every time I choose to say soft in a hard place, to speak when silence feels safer, to build with bare hands what systems have broken.
This is development, not GDP, but growth. Not the noise of numbers, but the music of meaning, the art of healing. And if hope is a place, then I am learning to live there, to make my work a window and my light a life, to make my art a voice other can speak through.
Because I believe that we are not just surviving, we are becoming daily together as one.
Wow, that was beautiful.
Thank you, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, that so perfectly captures it.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's a gift.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a gift from the gift
Yes.
to everyone. It's just the beauty of that, and that it is how you and I are kind of ending our conversation with new meaning that we created together and that she completed in some way in Vygotsky's sense.
Yeah. It's really beautiful. And as we do wrap up, I love ending on the note of that poem and just want to offer one last chance to you to say, what else? What do you want to leave us with? Is there anything we didn't get to today or anything you want to kind of reiterate or reaffirm for people, especially after we've just heard that poem?
I would absolutely love it if people would take a chance on A Developmentalist Guide to Better Mental Health, my latest book from Routledge. It is exceedingly delightfully practical, I must say. It has 50 letters from people just like your listeners are, just like you and me, asking for some developmental help. So you'll learn a lot about development. You'll learn a lot about creating meaning. You'll learn a lot about how to see differently and perform taller from that book.
I love it, Lois. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I like to end with the language of better social worlds. And the question for me is always, how are we creating better social worlds? I love thinking of a spinoff of that question of how are we performing better social worlds too? And it's in the performing, it's in all of these ing verbs, that are
Right.
active in our world, the performing, the creating, the playing. That's where I think the magic is. So Lois, thank you so much for your time, your perspective, the stories you shared today. It's been really wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, Abbie. It's been wonderful to talk with you. And I wish us success in the decency we're trying to bring about.
Yes. Yeah. A beautiful way to put it. Thanks, Lois. Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.